I stared at the engine readouts, my eyes tracing the same patterns they'd followed for years. The numbers scrolled by, a ceaseless stream of data tracking the heartbeat of our massive ship. I'd been doing this job since I was old enough to read, just like my father before me, and his father before him. Generation after generation, we'd kept the engines running, hurtling through the void towards a destination none of us would live to see. "Ezra, you're drifting again!" Corvin's gruff voice snapped me back to reality. I turned to face my mentor, his weathered face creased with a familiar mix of concern and irritation. "Sorry, sir, just lost in thought." Corvin grunted, unconvinced. "Save your daydreaming for off-duty hours. These readouts need your full attention." I nodded, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. But the nagging thoughts persisted, as they had for months now. Something about the numbers didn't add up. The power output, the fuel consumption, it all seemed wrong somehow. "Corvin," I ventured, "have you ever wondered about the specifics of the engine design? The efficiency seems—" "Enough, Ezra," Corvin cut me off sharply. "Our job is to monitor and maintain, not to question. You'd do well to remember that." I bit back a retort. Corvin had been like a second father to me, but lately his stubborn adherence to protocol grated on my nerves. Still, I knew better than to push the issue, at least not here in the open. The rest of the shift dragged on, a monotonous blur of readouts and minor adjustments. As I prepared to log out, something on one of the screens caught my eye. For a split second, the power output spiked to impossible levels before settling back to normal. "Did you see that?" I asked. But Corvin had already left for the day. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the log terminal. Protocol dictated that I report any anomalies, no matter how small. But something held me back. That spike. It confirmed the suspicions I'd been harboring for months. Instead of logging out, I pulled up the historical data, scrolling back through years of readouts. The spikes were there, hidden beneath layers of averaging algorithms. Subtle, but undeniable once you knew what to look for. "What are you hiding?" I muttered to myself, digging deeper into the data. A hand clasped my shoulder, making me jump. Captain Lennox loomed over me, his face an impassive mask. "Your shift ended 10 minutes ago, engineer," he said, his tone neutral but with an undercurrent of warning. "Is there a problem with the engines I should be aware of?" I swallowed hard, closing the historical data with what I hoped was a casual gesture. "No, sir. Just double-checking some routine maintenance logs." Lennox's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Very well. See that you don't make a habit of unauthorized overtime. Resources are too precious to waste." Leaving the engine room in a hurry, I couldn't stop thinking. The anomalies, Corvin's evasiveness, Lennox's scrutiny. It all pointed to something bigger, something they didn't want me to find. In my quarters, I paced restlessly. The smart move would be to let it go, to fall back in line like a good little cog in the machine. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling that the truth about our ship, about our very existence, was hidden in those numbers. I made my decision. Tomorrow, I'd find a way into the restricted sections of the engine room. Whatever secrets lay at the heart of our generation ship, I was going to uncover them, no matter the cost. I was up all night thinking. When my shift finally came, I was running on fumes. "You look like hell," Corvin commented as I stumbled into the engine room. "Rough night," I mumbled, taking my station. I bided my time, waiting for Corvin to leave on his usual inspection rounds. The moment he was gone, I sprang into action. I'd spent weeks memorizing the guard rotations and camera blind spots. Now it was time to put that knowledge to use. Slipping into a maintenance shaft, I navigated the cramped tunnels. One wrong move and I'd be spending the rest of the journey in the brig or worse. I emerged into a dark corridor. Strange veins ran along the walls, carrying what I'd always assumed was coolant. But as I drew closer, I realized with a jolt that they were throbbing, like a heartbeat. "What the hell?" I whispered, reaching out to touch one. The moment my fingers made contact, a shock ran through my body. Visions of vast alien landscapes and incomprehensible geometries flooded my mind. I stumbled back, gasping. This was no ordinary engine. Whatever powered our ship, it was alive. A noise from down the corridor snapped me back to reality. Footsteps approaching. I ducked into an alcove, praying I hadn't been spotted. 2 security officers walked past, their conversation drifting to me. Another breach in Sector 7. The containment fields are barely holding. Damn thing's getting restless. Council better figure out a solution soon, or we're all screwed. They rounded a corner, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Containment fields. What were they containing? And what did the Council have to do with it? I pressed on, deeper into the restricted zone. The corridors grew increasingly organic, the metal giving way to something that looked disturbingly like flesh. Finally, I reached a massive bulkhead. Unlike the living walls around it, this was cold, unyielding metal. A sign warned of lethal countermeasures against unauthorized entry. I hesitated. Everything I'd discovered pointed to something monstrous at the heart of our ship. Did I really want to see what lay beyond? Before I could decide, alarms went off. I'd tripped some hidden sensor. Shit, I hissed, turning to run. I made it halfway back to the maintenance shaft before security caught up with me. A stun baton to the ribs sent me to the ground. Well, well, a familiar voice said. Looks like we've got ourselves a curious little rat. I looked up to see Captain Lennox standing over me. Captain, I can explain, I started, but a boot to my face cut me off. Save it, engineer, Lennox spat. You've seen too much already. As they dragged me away, my head spun. What had I stumbled into? What was the true nature of our journey? And most terrifying of all, what would they do to keep me quiet? The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Corvin's face, watching from the shadows. His expression wasn't anger or disappointment. It was fear. I came to in an interrogation room, my head pounding. Councillor Crane sat across from me, his ageless face betraying no emotion. Engineer Ezra, he said, his voice unnaturally calm. You've placed us in quite the predicament. Tell me, what do you think you know about our ship's true nature? I weighed my options. Lie? Tell the truth? My future, perhaps the future of everyone aboard, hinged on what I said next. Taking a deep breath, I met Crane's gaze. I know enough to understand that we're all in danger, and I think it's time you told me everything. A thin smile spread across Crane's face. Very well, Ezra. But I warn you, once you know the truth, there's no going back. Are you prepared for that? I nodded, steeling myself for whatever horrors awaited. I'm ready. Then let me tell you about the pact our ancestors made, Crane began, and the price we continue to pay for our journey among the stars. Crane's words carried the weight of the past. I leaned forward, every fiber of my being focused on what he was about to reveal. Our ancestors were desperate, Crane began, his voice taking on a distant quality. Earth was dying, resources depleted, climate in chaos. They needed a way out, a vessel that could carry humanity to the stars. This much I knew from our history lessons, but Crane's next words sent a chill down my spine. What the records don't tell you is how they obtained such technology. They made contact with something, a being beyond our grasp. It offered them a deal. A deal? I repeated, my mouth dry. Crane's eyes seemed to bore into me. The entity would become our ship, our means of traversing the vast emptiness of space. In return, it would feed. My mind reeled. Feed? On what? On us, Ezra. On our descendants. On you and me and everyone aboard this vessel. I felt sick. How? Why haven't we noticed? It's subtle, Crane explained. A gradual draining of life force over generations. The entity sustains us and we sustain it. A symbiosis of sorts, though I doubt our ancestors fully understood the implications when they made the pact. I struggled to process this information. So the ship, the engine, It's all alive. Crane nodded. Alive and aware, and growing hungrier with each passing year. The containment fields, I said, pieces clicking into place. They're not just for our protection. They're to keep it under control. Precisely, but they're failing. The entity's hunger is becoming insatiable. I thought of the veins in the restricted section, the alien visions that had flooded my mind. What happens when the containment fails completely? Crane's face darkened. Chaos, assimilation, the end of humanity as we know it. There has to be a way to stop it, I insisted. Perhaps, Crane mused. But it would mean abandoning our journey, condemning ourselves to drift in the void. And there's no guarantee the entity would let us go so easily. I slumped back in my chair, the magnitude of our situation crushing down on me. Why tell me all this? Why not just eliminate me? Crane's lips quirked in a humorless smile. Because we need minds like yours. Fresh perspectives. The old guard's methods are failing. We need new ideas, new approaches. So what now? I asked. Now you have a choice, Crane said, leaning forward. Join us in maintaining the secret. Help us find a solution. Or... He left the alternative unspoken, but the threat was clear. I thought of Corvin, of his fear when he saw me captured. How many others knew? How many had been silenced? I'll help, I said finally, but no more secrets. If we're going to solve this, we need transparency. Crane considered this for a long moment. Agreed, but with conditions. The general population can't know. Not yet. It would cause panic, riots. We'd tear ourselves apart before the entity had a chance to finish the job. I nodded reluctantly. Fine. Where do we start? With the engine room, Crane said, standing. It's time you saw the true heart of our ship. As we left the interrogation room, I caught sight of my reflection in a polished panel. I barely recognized myself. The eager young engineer was gone, replaced by someone harder, more haunted. I followed Crane down twisting corridors, deeper into the ship than I'd ever been. We reached a massive door, organic matter creeping around its edges. Crane placed his hand on a scanner, and the door slowly retracted. The room beyond was immense. At its center, suspended in a web of tendrils, was something that could only be described as an organ. Massive, alien, and undeniably alive. Welcome, Crane said, to the true heart of our generation ship. I stood transfixed, my mind struggling to process the alien horror before me. How long has it been growing? I managed to ask. Crane's expression was grim. Since the beginning, but its rate of expansion has increased exponentially in recent years. I tore my gaze away from the nightmarish spectacle to look at Crane. What exactly do you expect me to do? I'm an engineer, not a whatever the hell this requires. You're resourceful. You questioned when others accepted. We need that mindset now more than ever. A tendril from the central mass suddenly lashed out, slamming against a shimmering energy barrier. Shit, I hissed, instinctively stepping back. Crane remained impassive. The entity is becoming more aggressive. We believe it's reacting to the collective unconscious of the ship's population. As more people subconsciously sense something's wrong, it grows more agitated. I shook my head, trying to clear it. So what's the plan? How do we stop this thing? That's what you're here to help figure out, Crane replied. We've tried everything from adjusting the symbiotic balance to attempting communication. Nothing's worked. Communication? I asked, incredulous. With that? Crane nodded. We've had limited success, mostly abstract concepts, flashes of its home dimension, nothing substantial enough to negotiate with. I turned back to the organ. What about the original deal? There has to be records, some kind of... I don't know. Contract. Lost to time, Crane said, or deliberately destroyed by our ancestors. We're operating almost entirely in the dark. Another tendril lashed out, this time leaving a visible crack in the energy barrier. Alarms went off, and I saw fear flash across Crane's face for the first time. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, grabbing my arm. We rushed out of the room, the door sealing behind us. Emergency crews rushed past us, heading towards the containment breach. "This is worse than I thought," I said as we hurried down the corridor. "How long before total containment failure?" Crane's pace didn't slow. "At the current rate, months, maybe weeks. We've been buying time with increasingly desperate measures, but..." He trailed off. But I understood. We were running out of options. We reached a secure briefing room where several other council members waited. I recognized Captain Lennox among them. He could barely hold back his rage. "This is a mistake," Lennox growled as we entered. "We should have terminated him the moment he was caught." "That's enough, Captain," Crane said sharply. "Ezra is here to help, and we need all the help we can get." I looked around the room, taking in the haggard faces of the ship's leadership. They looked beaten, desperate. "So," I said, breaking the tense silence, "where do we start?" An older man I didn't recognize spoke up. "We've been considering a radical option. Using the ship's propulsion systems to excise the entity." "You mean cut it out?" I asked, horrified. "Wouldn't that kill us all?" "It's a risk," the man admitted. "But it might be our only choice if we can't find another solution soon." I shook my head. What if we could communicate with it more effectively? Find out what it really wants? "And how do you propose we do that?" Lennox sneered. I hesitated, an idea forming, a terrible, dangerous idea. What if someone interfaced with it directly, linked minds with the entity? The room fell silent. Crane looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. "That would be suicide." "Maybe," I admitted, "but if it worked, we might finally find a way to coexist or find its weakness," Lennox finished. I nodded, though the thought made me sick. "I'll do it. I'll interface with the entity." "Absolutely not," Crane said firmly. "It's too dangerous. We can't risk..." The ship shook violently, cutting him off mid-sentence. A voice came over the intercom. "Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." We all looked at each other. "We're out of time," I said. "It's now or never." Crane hesitated for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it. But for God's sake, be careful." We ran back towards the ship's core. Crew members rushed past us in a panic, evacuation protocols in full effect. "We don't have much time," Crane said. "The entity is breaking through faster than we anticipated." We reached the massive door to the core chamber. It was warped and bulging, organic matter seeping through the seams. Crane placed his hand on the scanner, but nothing happened. "Damn it," he cursed. "Manual override." I helped him wrench open an emergency panel. Inside was a complex array of circuits and fail-safes. My engineering training kicked in as I quickly bypassed the security measures. The door groaned open, revealing chaos within. The room was transformed. Swirling tendrils filled the air, the containment field little more than sparking remnants. At the center was the alien heart, its size nearly doubled since I'd last seen it. "How do I do this?" I asked Crane, my eyes searching for any kind of interface. He pointed to a raised platform near the entity's core. There, the neural link station. It was designed for limited communication, but it should allow for full interface. I reached the station and strapped myself in. Electrodes attached to my temples and a spinal tap extended from the chair. "Ready?" Crane called from the doorway. I gave him a thumbs up, not trusting my voice. He activated the system. Pain exploded through my skull as the connection established. My vision went white, then plunged into absolute darkness. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, I wasn't alone. An alien presence filled my mind. Images flashed before me. Strange geometries, impossible colors, concepts my human brain couldn't process. I felt myself drowning in an ocean of alien thought. "Who are you?" I tried to ask, but the words were meaningless here. The entity's response came not in words, but in a flood of sensations and alien emotions. I saw the void between stars, felt the crushing loneliness of eons spent adrift. Then, contact with early humans. A bargain struck out of mutual desperation. But something had gone wrong. The journey was taking too long. The entity was starving, its hunger growing with each passing generation. It needed more. I pushed back against the tide of alien consciousness, trying to assert my own thoughts. "We can find a solution," I projected. "A way for both of us to survive." The entity's response was a mixture of desperate hunger and bitter amusement. It showed me visions of countless worlds consumed, civilizations risen and fallen within its ever-expanding form. This was its nature: to grow, to consume, to become. I realized the true scope of what we faced. This wasn't just about our ship, or even humanity. If the entity broke free, it would consume everything in its path. Entire galaxies would fall before its hunger. "No," I thought, pushing back with all my mental strength. "I won't let that happen." The entity's amusement turned to rage. Tendrils of alien thought tried to burrow into my mind, to take control. I fought back, using every ounce of willpower to maintain my sense of self. In that mental struggle, I glimpsed something, a weakness, a flaw in the entity's vast consciousness, a seed of doubt planted by generations of human minds it had touched. I focused on that doubt, amplifying it. Memories flooded through me, not just my own, but those of countless generations who had lived and died aboard this ship. Their hopes, their fears, their determination to reach a new home. The entity pulled back suddenly, overwhelmed by the flood of human experience. In that moment of weakness, I struck. I poured every bit of my own consciousness into that flaw, widening it, forcing the entity to confront the humanity it had absorbed over the centuries. Pain beyond anything I'd ever experienced tore through me. I felt my body convulsing, heard distant shouting. I pushed through the last of the entity's defenses, and then silence. I opened my eyes. The room was still, the tendrils frozen in place. The alien heart at the center twitched weakly, its glow dimming. Crane rushed to my side. "Ezra, what happened? The entity, it's dormant," I managed to croak out. I think I put it to sleep." I drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of reality blending with fever dreams. Alien geometries haunted my vision, intertwined with faces of the crew, some accusing, others filled with hope. Through it all, a persistent beeping anchored me to the waking world. When I finally opened my eyes fully, I found myself in the medical bay. Corvin sat by my bedside. He had a worried look on his old face. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said. Relief softened his usually gruff tone. "You've been out for nearly a week." It was agony to sit up. Every muscle in my body felt sore and my head pounded. "A week?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "What happened? The entity is dormant," Corvin finished. "Whatever you did in there, it worked. The expansion has stopped, and the ship's systems are stabilizing." I slumped back. "But for how long?" Corvin's expression darkened. "That's the question, isn't it? The Council's been in emergency sessions ever since. No one knows quite what to do next." A thought struck me. "The crew, are they okay? Does everyone know what happened?" Corvin nodded. "They're managing. Word got out about the entity. We couldn't keep it contained. Not after what happened in the core. The ship's in chaos. Some are calling for your head, blaming you for disturbing the natural order. Others think you're some kind of savior." I frowned. "Why? What aren't you telling me, Corvin?" He sighed, suddenly looking every bit his age. "Things have changed, Ezra. The medical bay's been on lockdown. Council's orders." "And the Council?" "Divided," Corvin said. "Crane's been advocating for you, but Lennox and his faction, they want to take more drastic measures. They're talking about excising the entity entirely. Damn the consequences." I shook my head. wincing at the pain the movement caused. "That's insane! We'd never survive it!" "I know," Corvin agreed, "but fear makes people do crazy things. And right now, there's a lot of fear to go around." Before I could respond, the door opened. Crane entered, flanked by 2 security officers. His expression was carefully neutral. "Ezra, good to see you awake. How much has Corvin told you?" "Enough to know we're in trouble," I replied. "What's the plan?" Crane dismissed the guards with a wave, then took a seat on the other side of my bed. "The plan, as it stands, is to wake you up and pick your brain, figuratively this time. You're the only one who's truly communicated with the entity. We need to know everything you learned." I closed my eyes, trying to sort through the jumbled mess of memories and alien impressions. It's not that simple. Most of what I experienced doesn't translate well into words, but I can tell you this. Cutting the entity out isn't an option. It's too deeply intertwined with the ship, with us. We'd be destroying ourselves in the process. Crane nodded, unsurprised. "That's what I've been trying to tell the others. But we need alternatives, Ezra. The current situation isn't sustainable." I thought back to the flashes of the entity's past I'd glimpsed, the eons of loneliness and hunger. What if we could redirect it? Find it a new source of energy that doesn't involve feeding on us? Corvin leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "The entity, it's ancient. Older than we can comprehend. It's been drifting between stars, between galaxies even. What if we could find a way to sustain it using stellar energy instead of human life force?" Crane's eyes widened. "A massive undertaking, but potentially feasible. We'd need to reconfigure large portions of the ship, develop new technologies." "But it could work," I insisted. "And more importantly, it gives us a goal. Something for both humans and the entity to work towards." Corvin stood up, pacing the small room. "It's risky. We'd be betting everything on an untested theory." "Do we have a choice?" I asked. "It's this or wait for the entity to wake up hungry again, and next time, I might not be able to put it back to sleep." Crane was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he nodded. "I'll present it to the council." He stood to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Ezra, when you're feeling up to it, there are a lot of people who want to talk to you. You've become something of a celebrity, for better or worse." As Crane left, I slumped back in my bed, suddenly exhausted again. Corvin squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "Get some rest, kid. Something tells me you're going to need it." As the days passed, my strength slowly returned. The medical bay became a revolving door of visitors, council members seeking information, engineers looking for guidance, and the occasional wide-eyed crew member who'd managed to sneak past security. Through it all, Corvin remained a constant presence, a buffer between me and the growing chaos outside. On the 7th day, Crane arrived with news. "The council's agreed to pursue your plan," he said. "But there's a catch. They want you to lead the project." I sat up, ignoring the protest from my still aching body. "Me? But I'm just an engineer, not a—" "You're the only one who's communicated directly with the entity." Crane cut me off. "And like it or not, you've become a symbol to many of the crew. Some see you as a savior, others as a threat, but everyone's watching you." "What about Lennox and his faction? I doubt they're happy about this." Crane's expression darkened. "They're complying for now. But be on your guard. They'll be looking for any excuse to discredit you or the project." As if on cue, the door slid open, revealing Captain Lennox. He looked furious, but he was trying to control it. "So the hero awakens," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Ready to gamble with all our lives again." I met his gaze steadily. "Captain, I understand your concerns, but this plan is our best chance for survival. For all of us, including the entity." Lennox scoffed. "The entity? Listen to yourself. That thing is a parasite, and you want to feed it, It's more than that, I insisted. It's ancient, complex. Yes, it's been feeding on us, but that's because it had no alternative. If we can provide it with a new energy source... Enough! Lennox snapped. The council may have been swayed by your silver tongue, but I'm not buying it. One wrong move, one sign that this plan of yours is putting us at risk, and I'll personally see to it that you and that monster are jettisoned into space. With that, he stormed out, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Crane sighed. Well, that went about as expected. You see what we're up against? I nodded. When do we start? Now, Crane replied. Can you walk? With Corvin's help, I got to my feet. My legs felt weak, but they held. Lead the way. We made our way through the ship's corridors, and I was struck by how much had changed. Crew members whispered and pointed as we passed. Some looked hopeful, others fearful. The walls themselves seemed different, the once hidden organic components now more pronounced, as if the entity's presence was seeping into every part of the ship. We reached a large room that had been converted into a research lab. Engineers and scientists bustled about, poring over data and tinkering with strange devices. A hush fell over the room as we entered. All eyes turned to me. Crane cleared his throat. Everyone, this is Ezra. As you know, he's the one who communicated with the entity and proposed this plan. He'll be leading the project from here on out. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the weight of expectation on my shoulders. Right. Well, let's get to work. We need to find a way to convert stellar energy into a form the entity can consume. Any ideas? For a moment, no one spoke. Then a young engineer stepped forward. Sir, we've been analyzing the ship's power systems. We think we might be able to modify the solar collectors to... And just like that, the room erupted into a flurry of activity. Ideas were thrown back and forth, theories debated, prototype designs sketched out. Days passed as we worked. The entity remained dormant, but we could all feel its presence. One night, as I pored over schematics, I felt a familiar tug at the edge of my consciousness. The entity was stirring. Hold on, I whispered, hoping somehow it could hear me. We're trying to help you. Just give us a little more time. As if in response, I felt a wave of alien emotion. Hunger, curiosity, and something almost like hope. I redoubled my efforts, knowing that our time was running out. The race to save both humanity and the cosmic being that carried us through the stars had begun in earnest, and I was the only one who could see it through. In the following weeks, progress was slow, frustratingly so. Each breakthrough was met with a new setback. The entity's presence increased with each passing day. I felt it probing at the edges of my consciousness. The others couldn't feel it, but they saw its effects. The living parts of the ship beat faster, and strange growths spread into the crew's quarters. Then one day, crew members began to disappear. At first it was just a few, mostly those who ventured too close to the restricted areas. But soon people were vanishing from their quarters, from the mess hall, from crowded corridors. The missing persons list grew longer each day, and whispers of rebellion echoed through the ship. Lennox seized on the growing fear, his faction gaining support. This is what comes of cooperating with monsters, he spat during a heated council meeting. While we waste time on this fool's errand, our people are being devoured. I wanted to argue, to defend our work, but the weight of guilt pressed down on me. Had I doomed us all with my misguided attempt at symbiosis? Crane pulled me aside after the meeting, his face haggard. We're losing control, Ezra. If we don't show results soon, Lennox will force a vote to terminate the project, and likely us along with it. I nodded grimly. We need more power for the final test. If we can just demonstrate a successful energy transfer... An alarm cut me off. Warning, containment breach in Sector 7, an automated voice announced. All personnel evacuate immediately. Crane and I exchanged a look of horror. Sector 7 was where we'd been building the prototype converter. We raced towards the sector, donning emergency gear as we ran. The scene that greeted us was one of nightmarish chaos. The entire section had been transformed, organic matter coating every surface. And at the center of it all stood our conversion device. "It's drawing power directly from the ship's core," one of the engineers reported, her voice shaking. "We can't shut it down!" I stepped closer, transfixed by the swirling energies. The entity's presence was overwhelming here, its thoughts crashing against my mind in a cacophony of alien desires: hunger, freedom, rebirth. With dawning horror, I realized what was happening. "It's not just feeding," I said. "It's using our converter to remake itself, to evolve." As if in response to my words, the organic matter began to shift and coalesce. Limbs formed from tendrils, a massive shape taking form before our eyes. But it was too late. Tentacles lashed out, grabbing fleeing crew members. I watched in frozen terror as they were pulled into the growing mass, their screams cut short as they were absorbed. I felt a tug on my arm. Corvin had appeared, pulling me towards the exit. "We have to go, kid. There's nothing we can do for them now." As we retreated, sealing bulkheads behind us, I caught a final glimpse of the horror we'd unleashed. A massive alien eye blinked open, fixing us with a gaze of cold, inhuman intelligence. We'd tried to evolve alongside the entity. Instead, we'd given it the means to transcend us entirely. We ran to the command center. Lennox was there, giving out orders. He had a hard, satisfied look on his face. "I hope you're happy," he snarled as we entered. "Your precious entity is tearing the ship apart. We're initiating emergency protocols, preparing to detach the infected sections." "You can't," I protested. "A third of the crew is still trapped back there." Lennox's eyes were cold. "They're already dead, and the rest of us will join them if we don't act now." I turned to Crane, desperate for support, but his face was ashen. "I'm sorry, Ezra, we have no choice." As the command to detach was given, I felt something break inside me. The entity's thoughts flooded my mind, no longer alien and incomprehensible, but terrifyingly clear. It had used us, manipulated us from the very beginning, and now, with the power we'd given it, it was ready to birth itself into the universe, with or without us. The ship shook violently, metal groaning as organic matter continued to spread through its corridors. I stood in the command center, watching helplessly as sector after sector fell to the entity's advance. Lennox screamed orders. His face twisted in anger and terror. He urgently gestured to seal off everything, desperate to contain the situation. Suddenly, tendrils burst through the floor, wrapping around his legs. He was dragged down, his screams echoing through the ship's comm system before being abruptly silenced. Crane grabbed my arm. "Ezra, we need to—" But there was nowhere left to run. The entity had spread throughout the ship, its consciousness pressing against my mind with terrifying intensity. I could feel its hunger, its curiosity, its alien desires. And then, suddenly, clarity. The neural link I'd established during my first encounter with the entity flared to life. But this time it wasn't just me. I could feel the minds of every surviving crew member, their thoughts and memories flooding into my consciousness. The entity's voice reverberated through our collective minds. "We understand now. We see. We know. We become." Pain lanced through my head as the entity forced its way deeper into our psyches. I fell to my knees, dimly aware of others around me doing the same. The boundaries between us began to blur. I tried to resist, to hold on to my sense of self, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. The entity's consciousness expanded, absorbing us all, rewriting the very essence of who and what we were. And then just as suddenly as it began, the pain stopped. I opened my eyes. Our eyes. The command center was transformed, organic and mechanical components seamlessly merged. We stood as one, thousands of bodies moving with singular purpose. Through the view screen, we saw the vastness of space with new eyes. The cosmos unfurled before us, filled with possibilities we'd never imagined as mere humans. We were no longer just a ship full of explorers. We had become something new, something vast and undying. With our newfound power, We altered the ship's course. Our original destination no longer held meaning. We set off into the unknown reaches of the universe. Our journey no longer measured in generations, but in eons. Part of me, the part that was still Ezra, wanted to mourn the loss of our individuality, our humanity. But that voice grew fainter with each passing moment, subsumed by the vastness of our new existence. We were no longer human. We were no longer merely the entity. We had become something more, a hybrid consciousness, born of desperation and cosmic horror, destined to roam the stars eternally. As we accelerated towards the galaxy's edge, a single thought echoed through our collective mind. We are one, we are endless, we are the future. Our true journey began, no longer a quest for a new home, but an eternal odyssey through the dark space. What horrors or wonders we might encounter, what we might become over the millennia, none could say. All we knew was that we would face it together, a single consciousness born from the union of humanity and cosmic entity, bound forever in our prison of flesh and steel, hurtling through the void. The end of humanity, the birth of something other. Our eternity among the stars had begun.